Hi, this is Real Estate with Elise and Jay.
And that is Jay, and I am Elise.
If you've been in the real estate business as a real estate agent for less than 10 years, then what we're going to talk about today is for you.
Yes, absolutely. So, me and Jay both have been in the business about 20 years, and we've seen ups and downs of the real estate market. And right now, we are starting to get into a little shift of the market.
Yep, that's right. The market's been shifting and it's been a crazy market this year with inventory and interest rates and all that kind of stuff. So where do you want to start?
So, let's take it back to the beginning and just kind of talk about how we both got started in the real estate business.
Okay, so when I started, it was back in the early mid 2000s, and that at that point it was a pretty decent market for buyers, and that's when everything was kind of going crazy. And when you get back into, that's preceding the mortgage meltdown, Great Recession, that whole thing. So that's back when there was like stated income, stated assets. Like people, the joke was if you could fog a mirror, you could get a mortgage loan, right? I mean, you remember that time frame?
Yes, yes, I do.
So that's kind of when I got started. I was kind of learning the ropes, and I immediately thought, in that big sense, like, hey, I would like to own a brokerage, and not just because I wanted to like be the boss or be in charge of something, but because I thought in my brain that's how we could create, I guess, a business is what I was thinking. Like that's how we could bring on some other agents to work with us. We take care of them. We show them the ropes. Hopefully, it's a great relationship, and then that would eventually, when we were ready to stop, slow down, or retire, that would be a built-out business that we could count on that income from it. And so that was kind of the idea of why I wanted to start a brokerage. So then we started the brokerage, and it was right before the big crash. And then we kind of made it through the crash, came out on the other side. So we saw the kind of the run up, then that shift with the mortgage crisis, and then another like little shift where it was kind of a buyer's market there for a little while after all the sellers had a short sale and do all that stuff with their houses. And then call it 2012-ish. That's what started the run up that ran until like 2021, 2022. And then we started seeing this shifting market now. And so that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's kind of been the progress of what we've seen and kind of how I got started. What about you, Elise? I know the story, but let them know, like, how did you get started and what was that like?
Yeah, I got my license because we were friends back in the day, and you got your license. And so you said, "Why don't you?" And I was like, "Why not?" I had just graduated from college and had a job, and then got my license after I talked to you about it. I was working at a shipping company while I had my license, oil shipping company, and 2008 hit, and we were held with four big ships and nowhere to put them. And they were for Shell. And Shell was like, well, we're not going to buy those anymore. So we were out. And I always wanted to get into real estate full time, but I was just, worried. So it kind of forced my hand to do it. And I did it. And me and you worked together and got me learning the ropes and all that good stuff. Of course, didn't know what I was doing at the beginning, but got in, buckled down, learned, and now here we are.
So would you say that was a blessing in disguise that all that came about?
100%. Yes, yes, yes. I had to get out of my own way in order to do it full time and to trust myself to make it in the real estate world. And it's been great. It's been wonderful.
And so what would you say, like thinking back on when you started, what was the biggest struggle or your biggest fear of like getting started in real estate?
Well, of course, I mean, like a lot of people, I had mortgage and car payment, insurance, all that fun stuff. And I was like, well, if I don't sell anything, then what's going to happen?
Right.
And, you're only good as your last paycheck.
And so when you're looking at that, like, so what did we do? Do you remember to kind of get you started and going in the business? And
When
I'm
we
really
first
asking that
started,
too.
did Buffini, and we sent out letters. We, of course, we had our database. We started doing that kind of that stuff.
Back then, we were kind of working the work by referral.
Yes, we did that. And then, of course, we tried everything. But in the long run, the repeat and referral thing is the best thing that we did and that we've stuck to that works.
And so what about like, where did you find, like, I know for myself, my first client was like a friend from our neighborhood that needed to sell a place. So he's like, I'll give you a shot and we can help me sell my house. That one really opened my eyes because what happened was when he needed to sell, he was basically selling a rental house that he had. He purchased the house for himself. And then about 2-3 years after owning it, he got promoted and moved around. So he ended up moving into the neighborhood that we lived in. And that's how we all met. But then basically when we go to sell it, he was trying to plan for his retirement and what was coming up in his life. And so he wanted to sell that property. And he said, okay, well, I got to go talk to the people that are renting it from me. He's like, that's going to be the hardest part of this whole deal. And I was trying to figure out why. So when I asked him, he's like, well, they've been renting it from me for the last 25, 30 years. And they basically paid off the mortgage for him. And here he was planning on his retirement, setting himself up and his family up. So he went to go talk with them and let them know that he was going to be moving, right? Or he was going to be selling the house. And so I came over to, all excited to get my sign in the yard and get stuff going and all that kind of stuff. And here was this family, and I'll just kind of never forget it. But after 25 years, they're moving boxes to their car and they're putting stuff in storage. And basically they had paid off the mortgage, but they were going to start over at some new place at some other house. And my friend even said they were great tenants. They paid on time. They took care of the house. Unless it was something major like the roof or the water heater, he never had to fix it or do anything about it. And so anyway, that was kind of an eye-opener for me. So I guess I was getting all that out to say, what about you? Like, what do you remember how you got started, what your first transaction was and how that came about?
Right. But real quick, we go like when you go back to that poor family I had to leave, they had nothing to show for all of those 25 years that they were there and paying the mortgage and stuff. And we'll get back to that later. I think we can bring that story back. My first transaction, I think, was my sister. And the other agent on the other side said, is this your first transaction? Because I didn't know what I was doing. So after that day, I promised that I would know exactly what to do for the transaction.
So a couple of things to note there is, and I think the numbers are something like 90% of agents get their first transaction from a friend or family member or a referral from a friend or family member. And so for you and I, that's been true for both of our stories here, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing worth noting then is that was back in the days when, we thought earnest money was a guy. We didn't know he was it was a check that had to go to the title company.
I don't know how I didn't know. And the agent, that's why she called me out. She was like, is this your first transaction? I'm like, yeah, how'd you know? She's like, you didn't know to take the option and earnest money to title. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, just the easy things that we take for granted now. So that's why I like to teach other agents, because I don't want them to go through what I had to go through.
And I know, like, when you came on, it was during like the Great Recession, the mortgage meltdown, that 2008, 9, 10-ish period.
That's when I went full time. Yeah, license 06.
So what was that like? Do you remember the feeling or how it was during that Great Recession period?
Well, it was weird because I was still working at the shipping company full time, but I was doing some sales here and there. But you actually had to go through a lot more of that because I still had my full time job. But the reason of the recession, that's why I had to jump in full time. So it was like you said, it was a blessing in disguise for me personally, because that meltdown led to me actually going in full time at the worst time possible in real estate. But honestly, we started right away with reaching out to friends and family. And there's somebody in your sphere that is going to have to move, internet leads and stuff like that. So I do remember like reaching out to friends and family, and a few people here and there needed to buy and sell.
And I know for me, like, just a quick story with the Great Recession and all that, and just to remember that, that was also like a once in 100 something year event, right? Like, it was called the Great Recession because it was borderline the Great Depression from the 1920s in terms of the way that mortgage meltdown came across and really shook the market up or really stopped the market in its track, the real estate market. And so I think another kind of lesson to learn or thing to point out for agents is that a normal shifting market, those are going to occur every whatever that is, 10, 15-ish years, where the market's going to change because it just doesn't go on forever in one direction. But I think a lot of people get nervous and scared. And realistically, unless things are way worse than I understand them to be, '08 was like this anomaly that gets built up after a long time, right? There's reasons for the shift. And also another thing worth noting is that you came in during that time. And so by coming out of it, you're a stronger agent because there's a lot of agents didn't make it through that time. And I can seriously remember I had a friend that wanted to refinance a house that he had purchased, right? And it was an investment property. He had something like 100K in the bank and he couldn't get anybody. And this was probably February '08 or something like that. He couldn't get anybody to allow him to refinance that loan. Like he just couldn't get it. He couldn't get it done. And it took almost 6 months before the banks opened up again. And that's what I mean. That's how kind of scary and nerve-wracking it was for people. Like the banks were going down and they stopped lending. They had to take a pause to figure out what was going on, which meant every transaction that you had lined up, if the buyer had a mortgage, they were on pause, right? Which meant the seller was on pause. That seller's typically moving somewhere, which meant that where they were going was on pause. And then after that, sellers were short selling houses and cash for keys and all that kind of stuff was going on. It really was a lot different than now. And we don't have a historical chart, but a historical price chart for US housing, it kind of, it's got its ridges like that, kind of bumps up and down, but it kind of goes up, right? And then when you get to, can't remember, there's one earlier, but when you get there into 2008, it goes down and then climbs back up. And that's a big dip in that chart. Some people lost 50% of their home values during that time. So I just wanted to say, we made it through there. We know we can make it through the next one, and just want to encourage all of you that you can make it through the next shift. You just got to kind of focus on the basics and those types of things. So now we're coming out of the Great Recession. Things are moving along again. I think the government started doing some sort of like tax credit or tax break. Remember that? And then
Yeah, I do.
Kind of helped buyers get off the fence.
Oh, yeah, it did.
Come back into the market. And it was something like they were just going to give you $9,000 or $8,000. And you could use it for closing or this or that or whatever. So that started to kind of bring it on. But at that point, it was a buyer's market. A buyer could go look at a house, shop around for 3 or 4 weeks, take a month off and come back and go look at that same house again and go, okay, well, maybe I'll do this, but 10,000 off asking, and I'll take my closing costs. Yeah. And sellers were going, okay. So that's a huge jump from where we are now, right? Obviously, today's market is a lot different than that. So for us, we're kind of cruising along there, built out our brokerage, doing things like that. So what was the next big milestone or thing that you had? Like I know in your, but also like just in your day-to-day business, what was the next big thing that you remember or milestone you had?
Well, the next big thing that I remember was 7 years ago joining EXP.
Right. Oh yeah, that was huge.
That was big. Yeah, I didn't want to do it because we had our own brokerage, but I didn't. You saw a lot more of the headaches of the day-to-day stuff. So to me, that was another blessing that I didn't know that we needed. So that just joining and having the camaraderie we do now and the 3 lanes of income that we have and, stock, rev share, and our sales, it's totally changed our business and our lives. So that's the big one that I remember. What about you?
Well, so I was going to ask you maybe like even before that. So what was business like for you coming in 2013, 14, 15, 16? What was that like for you at that point? I mean, let me ask you this. Were you feeling the treadmill of the?
Definitely feeling the treadmill. But I think I remember during
hamster wheel, I guess I should say.
Hamster wheel. And I think I don't remember when, but it was early on in the career that I, first made my 100,000, because that was the year that was that's the mark that everybody wanted to make or wants to make or whatever. Right. And I remember doing that, and I was like, I got to do this again. It's it's been good. It's just like, oh, I got to do that. Oh, I got to do it all over again. I have to do it
Right.
all over again.
And what about like our camaraderie as far as working with other agents and dealing with other agents? I mean, did we do a lot of like
Oh, back then
pairings and educations? And what were we doing back then? What would you say our philosophy or attitude was back then for that?
we didn't do, we, no, we didn't talk to a lot of other agents. I mean, we knew some, but we didn't,
But why not?
because they were our competition back then. Like,
We weren't thinking like
we
big
weren't
enough.
thinking big enough, and we weren't thinking, oh, we want, these are our peers and we help each other. And now, we have so many agent friends because we opened up our minds to what it really should be about, and
Yeah.
not just, a treadmill and competing and just trying to not work with each other.
Oh yeah. Well, and everything just becomes much more fun and enjoyable when you've got people, to lean on and a group to work with. And, even like we were kind of on an island because at least in my mentality, like, hey, I'd love to go to an agent happy hour, but what am I gonna do there? Like I should be
Yeah.
going to like, a happy hour with some friends or family that might buy something. Why go over there and just meet some agents? But
Right.
come to learn that transactions typically go a lot smoother with people that you know versus people that you don't know, because you kind of know how to operate, how to talk to each other, how to get things done really.
Right.
um, and then I know, like, I remember kind of when we first saw EXP, or when I first saw it, and then like started clicking in my head. So I started doing some homework and laying out some numbers to see what it would be like. And I remember going, all right, this sounds good. And I felt like I did spreadsheet after spreadsheet and trying to check all these future numbers that, if this happens, what'll happen. And then basically it all came down to the question, what's the worst that could happen? And when I answered that, it was like, well, if we do it and go with EXP and it doesn't work out, I still have a broker's license. We still have a brand. We just, reopen our brokerage, and I don't think anybody would miss a beat. Right. In fact, when we moved, I mean, I know for a fact, a couple of people were like, oh yeah, I didn't even realize you guys had moved, because we were still advertising the same name and the same brand, just brokered by EXP. But even our own clients and friends didn't know that we had moved.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that coin was also, what if we move and EXP becomes everything that it has become? Then we would miss that. We would have missed that boat, or potentially missed that boat. And so,
Yeah.
and it was just, like I said, all the calculations and blah 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 and weeks that went into it, and it was that one simple question, like, what's the worst that could happen? And
Yeah.
the answer is we just go back to doing what we were doing anyway, right? So that was an eye-opening moment for me, and part of that big transition into EXP. And I know for me it was an easier decision because we opened the brokerage, like I said, to have a future kind of for ourselves. And what ends up happening is, especially, we weren't big enough, maybe 10 or 12 agents, but not big enough to have, an office manager and a trainer on staff and somebody doing IT work and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was basically us wearing all the hats, right? Okay, today I'm doing marketing, compliance, contract review. We still got to train people. We still got to go, take care of the E&O insurance. And in my brain, when I kind of saw the EXP and the model and all that, so that kind of obviously made me a lot more open, because I'd already felt that, felt the pain of doing that and going through that. And at that point, it was almost 10 years or so that we've been running the brokerage.
Yeah. And how
so,
was it since you joined EXP, how has it changed your business?
I mean, it's definitely changed on some very solid levels, like quantitative levels. We make more money, we work less hours. Like I know those numbers, but I mean, the biggest thing was like the reduction in stress, where I didn't have to come up with, E&O insurance, or worried about the compliance side of it, or just our futures in general, right? We're always trying to figure out, when we're making some money, where do we put it so that it can go to work and help us, at the end, at the end of our careers when we're either too old or too tired or just don't want to stick signs in yards anymore. Right. And that was the one thing that I was still trying to solve for, that I was having trouble figuring out. So with EXP, the thing that I remember the most, and it was more of a feeling, but it was like a huge stress relief. But I remember like, hey, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel now. Like I know where we're going and how to get there, and it's only this long. We just have to go. Right.
Yeah.
But before that, it was just like we were running around and let's try this and figure out that and do some of this. And so it was always like the stress and the weight of that stuff coming down. And to me, that was the one thing I remember. I literally remember thinking it's, the light at the end of the tunnel, and I can really see it now. What about you? I know this is probably a good story, but did you come willingly because we were at our own brokerage making 100%, or how did that transition go for you?
It wasn't very good. I did not want to do it because I was 100%. And like I said back then, I didn't have the mindset. I had a closed mind. But you said, what's the worst that can happen? And I was like, okay, fine, let's do it. So we did it. And I'm chugging along selling houses for the first 2 years. And you said, look in your back office and see how much stock you have. And I'm like, what? I mean, whatever. So I did. And it was significant. I was like, what is happening here? And you said, I told you. So then I started getting excited. And then I saw the rev shares coming in from your rev share. And then I chugged along for another 2 years. And I was like, oh gosh, I have enough money to pull out and buy an investment property.
Yeah.
And we did pull the money out, but we didn't have the investment property quite yet.
Did you pull out enough to make a down payment?
No, cash for the whole house, the whole thing.
Cash purchase.
Yes. And we didn't have the investment property yet. So I held it, and it was kind of perfect that the way it happened. We had, some friends that couldn't get a loan, and they could get the loan, but the house wouldn't go VA, and that's what they needed to do. And voila, I was there to purchase it and do seller finance for that. So, I mean, it's just things that I never thought that I could, save up that money to buy investment property cash.
Yeah, and I would venture to guess that we probably would have never saved up that money doing things the way we were doing before, because it's like, they give you some stock for free for making sales, but then you have that little, we do the agent equity plan where they take a little bit out of every check and give us the stock at a discount. Yeah. But it's like, you don't miss that $200 or that $300 or that $800, whatever it is. It's like nothing. And then, like you said, a year or two down the road, maybe 4 years down the road, you look over at it and it's a significant amount of money.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that's a life-changing amount of money. I mean, that's more than we could win on some game shows.
I'll still try.
I know you will.
Anyway.
So I was just going to say that bringing that forward now to this current market shift, I mean, I just wanted to discuss that a little bit and kind of hear, what do you see in the current market shift that you think agents should be looking out for and maybe working towards during this time?
So I think and feel that I know that people all they can talk about is the 7% interest rate. Yes, we get it. Historically, it's still low, but we were spoiled for the last few years of those crazy 2% and 4% interest rates. But what I say we look out for, what we need to do is we need to guide our buyers and sellers and let them know that if you're buying your house, your home, and property for the right reasons, if you're got your bigger family, if you're moving for a job, don't fret it. Like you need to still move on with your life. You still need to purchase. It always works out in the end.
Yeah. And people are still moving. I mean,
yeah.
Main reasons that people move are still the main reasons that people move, right? You get married, you get divorced. We had friends that had twins. They needed a bigger house. You had friends that were, everybody, all their kids moved out. They needed a smaller house. Maybe they wanted a smaller yard, less maintenance, no pool, right? Or you get the job that moves you from here to there, so you want to be closer for work. I mean, those are all kind of the main things that make people move. And those are still true and still in place. The difference is I think the sticker shock of interest rates is kind of wearing off. Like, people understand, hey, these are kind of the rates now, but at the same time, it's a big jump, and it happened really fast. But I think, like you were mentioning, the historical trends, the historical average for interest rates is somewhere around 8 to 10%. And so if we were just at all-time historic lows for in the twos and threes, where do you think we're going next, right? And ideally, it's a slower ride, right? Not a big jump in like 2 years like that. Ideally, it's a slower ride back to that historic average. But if we're thinking about it that way, right, the $300,000 house that you want to buy today at 7% is going to be, a $350,000 house next year at potentially 8%. I mean, we don't have a crystal ball to know where the market, like, what the interest rates are going to be doing. But, if you need to move, move and do it. If you need to sell and take your money and put it into, whatever you need to do next with it. But then if rates drop enough where it makes sense, then you can always refinance, which is really, it's easier to refinance than it is to get financed to purchase, right? So you've already done the hard part. And if rates don't fall back down where you can refinance, then you're looking like a genius anyway, because you have a house at 7% and the interest rate is 9.5%, right? Yeah. And so it's not a end all be all. I mean, you still need to live your life and make your
Right.
go of it. The other thing that I would mention too for agents out there is, right now, when the markets shift, that's when you can gain the market share. So if you think about it, like we said, in the mid 2000s, at that time in history, I know for the San Antonio Board of Realtors, SABOR, that they were at an all-time high of membership. And then 2008, 2009, 2010, that membership dropped. I think it lost about half of the members, right, in terms of agents that were dues paying in the MLS and all that stuff, right? And then, of course, it's jumped up and run again. But my point being that when agents leave, right, because like right now we're going through another shift, and the agents that have been doing it for 20, 30 years are like, man, I'm tired of messing with this. I don't want to go through this again. A few of them will get out, right? The people that are struggling, that have just got into the business, they're going to get out. Maybe a few that are doing okay are going to find, like a permanent, regular job, so to speak, and they'll get out. So that means that the amount of realtors that are selling houses is shrunk, right? But the amount of houses that we're selling isn't going to go down drastically, right? It's going to be, instead of selling 3,000 houses a month, we might sell, 2,200 houses a month, right? And if you do that math, 3,000 houses a month is 6,000 opportunities, because there's a buy side and a sell side, right? And if you're an agent like us, we do good, but I wouldn't say we're anybody's like superstar agents or whatever. But we're trying to get 1, 2, 3 deals a month out of the 6,000 that are available every month, or the 4,000 that are available every month. When you look at it like that, it's like, yeah, no wonder, right? And so anyway, that market share is there to be gained for the agents that stick it out and ride through this tough time. And so I would say, the kind of that conclusion for us is that, the summary would be, yes, stick it out, do what you can to improve your business, and then your market share, your gain is just going to shift. So like if you were selling 10 to 12 houses a year before this happened, and you write it out and stick with it, you'll be selling 18 to 20 houses a year when we come out of it. And that'll also be the run up for the next run. So you'll be in great position for the next, 10, 12, 15 years.
Yeah.
And so you just got to make that decision to do it now. And of course, we love to mentor agents and help people kind of avoid all the pitfalls and blunders that we made getting started and going through it. So I think our thing is, we could definitely take an agent and in 2 or 3 years, get them to where we were in 10 or 15 years easily.
Yeah.
So just throwing that out there, if you ever want to run something by us or ask a question, we're open to helping out and seeing how we can help you or answer some questions on lead gen or what have you. Even just a contract review. We don't mind looking at something and just pointing something out. So Anyway, I think that's plenty for today. Just
Yeah.
trying to recap 20 years. I mean,
Okay,
um,
everybody.
well, thank you, and we'll talk to everybody soon.
Okay. Bye.